Greetings, adventurers, and welcome back to the Den of the Drake. Other dragons hoard gold, while I hoard internet cringe. Now, this might be a bit surprising to some of you regular listeners, but I love a good romance story. I know it flies in the face of the normal content I produce, but I really do enjoy a good romance arc when it pops up organically in my D&D games. But I've said it once, I've said it a million times, I am begging you weirdos to use a romance arc with caution. Because it takes two to tango, and when one person starts breaking it down all quirky-like with someone who ain't about that kind of thing, well, you'll end up causing the other players to flee faster than Hassan Piker's causing advertisers to flee Twitch. Only difference is that you don't get to fall back on your status as a millionaire nepo baby to avoid the consequences of your actions. Ooh, tough break, kid. The story I have for you today stars a player who is way too invested in their own romance fantasy. So much that they think that healthy relationships only require one person to say, I do. And if you think that cute little things like conflicting sexualities or consent are enough to stop them, then oh boy! I think you should go back and watch some of my previous videos, preferably with your ad block turned off. Now, without any further delay, let's go ahead and dive right into the horrifying world of r/RPG horror stories. Enjoy. This week's story comes from Reddit user JoJo's Bizarre Throwaway and is titled Gay Romance Obsessed Player Thinks She's Entitled to My Straight Character's Dick. Hi there! After a previous post, I was asked to share a bit more detail on some of the scenarios that I had hinted at, specifically the moments where that player was throwing tantrums left and right if things didn't go their way, accusing me of being malicious and betraying them and their vision. So here I am with the tale of my very first campaign. The cast includes me, yours truly, playing a straight human cleric, Problem Player playing a gay half-elf bard, and DM, you know the drill, plus his DMPC, a pan human warlock / bard. Both players, so me and the other player, are women, which I fear is important to know here. Also, she and the DM have been friends for over a decade, which might be the reason this went on and on for so long as it did. So, let's get into it. The campaign is set in your typical high fantasy setting, and most of the core group meets up in a tavern. The group dynamic is great. There's some RP happening right off the bat, and we're having a fun time, getting down into our first mystery to solve in the town that we're staying in. By now, it's become clear that my cleric and the bard are the only male members of the party, and since the bard is your typical pretty, arrogant, very, very gay bard, he starts hitting on my cleric immediately. Now, my cleric is not only straight as an arrow, but also a recent widower. He lost his wife maybe 6 weeks ago and is very obviously not in a place to deal with it. He's refusing to sleep, he hasn't bathed in a while, and he's often absent-minded. Despite all of that, the bard continues to go after him. He doesn't seem to want to engage with the plot at all, and my personal highlight of that first session is player B asking to make an insight check to see if the cleric is gay. After the first few sessions, the player contacts me to ask about my character. I thought it was genuine interest and happily answered her. She voiced that she'd like a romance for her character and was wondering what my character's sexuality really was, and if there was a chance for them to be together. I answered truthfully that I didn't design him to have a romance in-game, as he had already had a wife, and a son for that matter, and his story was about healing, hence the cleric, and moving on. But there was no harm in being a little flirty around him, right? It seemed fun at first, and the other players enjoyed their typical bard and his fun side quest, so I said sure. My character was pretty oblivious to romance. Since he hadn't had a date in a long time, and since he grew up very sheltered, he was completely new to any other sexual orientation besides his own. So these two became a running gag of the campaign. We all knew it wasn't gonna happen. Except, the other player really wanted it to. In fact, she demanded it would. She had commissions drawn of both of them together. She wrote sexual stories about them. She would ask about my character's kinks, his previous sex life, and constantly beg to talk about the pairing. After every session, she would whine about how, despite me telling her it was okay that the bard flirted with him, my character didn't engage in it at all, and how she had thought that we were headed for a romance. In all fairness, I indulged her because I still thought it was really cool how interested she was in my character's development, and I really enjoyed talking about him. I wrote stories too, though not the same explicit content, and made art. After I had told her that no, the cleric would probably not have a relationship with the bard right off the bat, but if they were to ever date, it would be the slowest slow burn romance in the history of slow burn. She was thrilled, only to yell at me after the very next session about how my character was still not flirting back, and how I disappointed her and am massively ruining her fun. Probably the biggest red flag waved in my face right then, but again, I was oblivious to it, and ended up explaining the character concept again, and apologizing that it would take time, both for my character to work over his grief and to discover a different sexuality than what he believed he had had. The story went on, the others were still fun to RP with, and the bard seemed to not be as flirty with the cleric as he was in the beginning, so they actually became friends. Somewhat. Enter the warlock/bard, where things go downhill fast. So this DM NPC was an important character from another player's background, and connected to another one as well. He traveled with the party for a while, and it turned out that he was pretty similar in nature to the bard. He was hitting on pretty much everyone. He was maybe even a little bit more arrogant than the bard, and as pretty as he was, and, well, also partly a bard. To say that the other player hated this character's guts was an understatement. With another man in the party, there were a lot of RP moments between the three of us, where the bard would constantly try to mark his territory, and all the flirty behavior from the beginning came back, but worse. He would brag about having known my character longer and being friends with him, and how he hadn't tried anything before and it didn't work, so the warlock shouldn't bother. Now imagine that player's outrage when my character actually formed a really close bond with the DM NPC. The difference was that both the DM and I knew that there wasn't any romance happening, ever, and that this DM NPC's flirting was a quirk, not his entire personality. He actually had character that didn't revolve around his sexuality, and that was the polar opposite of my cleric's, which gave me a great chance at developing my character more as he challenged his morals, his perception of the world, and most importantly, his grief. The bard, on the other hand, had never even bothered to ask my cleric about his wife. When the party was staying in another tavern, they split into two rooms, one for the ladies and one for the men. And the men's room had only 2 beds. Cheap, I know, but genuinely fun back then. The bard, of course, insisted that the cleric shares a bed with him, despite him immediately offering to sleep on the ground. It went on, with the bard becoming increasingly more irritated and almost ordering my character around, claiming that there was only one sensible choice here until I had finally had enough. I described how my character went over to the warlock's bed and the whole group was dying from laughter. Now, this was also one of the first sessions that we played live, so I sat right next to the player when this happened, and I still haven't forgotten the way she stared at me. Afterwards, back to online sessions and chatting again, all hell broke loose. She went off on me about how I had betrayed her, how I told her my character wasn't into men. Why on earth is he so close to the DM NPC after all the work she had put in? And how dare I? This was the first time I really started to realize how much B had frustrated me with her vision of the beloved pairing. And I wish I can give you a happy ending to this, but the truth is that the game went on, with me mostly focusing on the stuff I enjoyed and trying to ignore the stuff that I didn't. There were still moments where that player would throw a fit when my character and the DMPC had solo RP moments, and in the end, after me approaching the DM with this issue, he decided to give her the romance that she so desired through an NPC specifically for that purpose. Now, a quarter of our playtime was dedicated to that player living her romance fantasy, including fully RP date nights, and B would pick up writing and commissioning art again. The game didn't last much longer after that, but we would continue to play other campaigns together, mostly because she was a package deal with other people that I cared about. She was definitely the worst problem player I've ever had to deal with, and in hindsight, this first experience in a game with her wasn't even the worst thing she would do. But it was the creepiest for sure. Oh, except for that one time in my campaign where she wanted me to play out a grooming relationship between a 30-ish old man and her 15-year-old character because love, I guess? Where, as it turns out, she didn't even intend for this man to be a creep despite writing in his backstory that he was physically attracted to a young boy and regrets not showing him the ropes. But that's a story for another time. Until then, TLDR. Player is deeply invested in her gay fantasy and throws a fit every time my straight character doesn't play his part. Wait, hold up, you can't just drop something like that in my lap, OP. That's like going up to someone and saying, hey, hold this, before passing them a live grenade. What the f? Okay, we're gonna save that dumpster fire for when we cover part 2, but on the topic of part 1, do you have any idea how much of a troglodyte you have to be to make me, of all people, feel bad for a DMPC? It's a lot. You have to be a lot of troglodyte to make me feel bad for a DMPC. Look, you really don't need me to say that romance requires a bit more than pointing at somebody and saying, swiggity swooty, you want my booty. And that goes for both real life and in the context of a TTRPG, you freaks. Romance arcs, especially ones that might include sexual interactions like this one, are a touchy subject for a lot of people. Granted, OP did say that flirting was fine, but what this player did went beyond just flirting. The cold hard truth is that if you're getting upset at another player for playing a character in a way that does not match the fantasy you have in your head, 9 out of 10 times, you're the asshole here. But besides the obvious consent issues here, the problem player's main issue comes from the way they made their character. Okay, problem player, tell us about your character. I'm gay. Oh, no, that's nice, but I want to know what your class and race is. Oh, my bad. I'm a gay, and my class is homosexual. But I wanted to ask if I could multi-class into being gay. The problem isn't that they made a gay character, the problem is that they made a character that is only gay. Having your character be defined entirely by their sexuality is boring at best and deeply uncomfortable at worst. I mean, could you imagine if someone were to bring a character to a D&D game whose entire existence revolved around how straight they were? I'd want to throw that character straight into the sun. Good characters are not defined by who they want to have sex with. Stereotypes and fetishizations are, however, and most of the time, those are bad. That's why so many attempts at representation in recent years end up being more offensive and boring than anything. The writers just kinda enter the writing room with the idea that this character must be insert racial, religious, or sexual identity here, and then just kinda say, okay, he's ready to go, send him to the masses, it. To make a good character, they need to have a character. But let's not kid ourselves. We all know that Problem Player didn't enter this game with the intention of making a good character, no. Our precious little princess has much more insidious intentions, which I believe we'll absolutely get to see more of in part 2. God, I feel like I need a shower and I haven't even finished reading the damn thing yet. Part 2 is titled, Player Manipulates DM into Bending the Campaign to Her Every Whim, from magical items to changing every story beat to defending an underage relationship. A cautionary tale of escalation. Trigger warning. Mental health issues and abuse. Please take care of yourself before and after reading this post. Hi there, Reddit. Yes, I do have a flair for the dramatic why. It's been a full year since I first posted in here, and I feel like it's time to really unpack this story. As with my last post, this one deals with the same problem player that is thankfully out of my life these days. But since this one happened to be my first campaign as a DM, it took me a long time to work through it, and love the game again. I have since rebooted this campaign with a trusted friend group, and I am absolutely having a blast with it. So, there's a happy ending today. It's going to be a long one, bear with me, and let me introduce the cast. DM, yours truly, Wizard/Warlock, from here just called Warlock, the problem player in question, Fighter, the Wizard's longtime friend. The campaign had 2 other players, but they aren't as important to this story, so without further ado, the campaign is set in a homebrew setting with 2 main storylines dealing with 1, politics, and 2, old magic versus new technology. There were also very few restrictions during character creation, so every race or class was fair game. Everyone came up with really cool concepts that fit my pitch, except, you guessed it, the Warlock. She proposed a young Furbolg from a distant continent who got infected with a deadly sickness that had his parents put him in isolation in the desert to die, where he was mysteriously rescued by his patron. He would then travel across an ocean to where the actual campaign took place. There were a few problems with that. Not only was there no desert, I also had never introduced other continents as a possibility. And that's not even touching on how he, at such a young age, traveled such a distance. The biggest issue came with his sickness. She basically wanted there to be a plague in this world that not only was 100% deadly and had no cure, but also specifically targeted towards people with magical abilities. I don't think I have to explain to my fellow DMs here that that's really bad manners. You don't come to the table and expect that level of influence on the world building, at least not without the DM inviting you to do so as part of your character creation. Needless to say, I was a bit baffled. I responded back that we could make something work if she was really set on this idea, but I'd need to workshop this sickness with her, as it would be a huge issue for my general story idea. She instantly flipped out and demanded that she gets the only say over this since it's at the core of her character design, so logically she should be the one to design it. I tried explaining to her that that would not work for me and repeated my offer to figure something out with her. This time she did a 180 switch and told me to just design it myself then. I was, again, a bit baffled and slightly infuriated. Of course, this already is a bright red flag, but I didn't realize it back then. I had played with this player before, and she was a package deal with other players, and I was really excited to get a campaign going, so I had to include her. We went back and forth on this issue until eventually I dropped the entire thing. I told her I simply would not bring this sickness up, and it would just stay on this distant continent that had mysteriously appeared in my world building. But the problems during character creation don't end here, and I'll remind you of the trigger warning from the beginning of this post. See, she had also handed me a bunch of NPCs from her Warlock's past, including a mentor figure who took Warlock in and trained him for 3 years. At the point they met in the story, Warlock was 15 years old. Now mind you, that's in Firbolg years, so in human years, he couldn't have been older than 10. Just to spare you the headache, let's stick with 15 as a number. Said mentor figure was 28 at the time, and I hope your alarm bells are ringing right now. Because here's the other thing. In the document she handed me, unbeknownst to her character, the mentor was lawful evil, and also had a criminal background. He had to, and I quote, suppress his waking sexual interest in Warlock, and upon parting ways unexpectedly kissed him, and told him that he regrets not being able to show him the ropes. Me, a sensible person, read this as, this mentor is evil and a creep. Got it. Very bad stuff. Good material for an antagonist, though. This is where Fighter becomes important. In his backstory, there was a similarly bad relationship between Fighter, who was 16 in human years, and the leader of a group of mercenaries 30 years old, who took him under his wing. It was very clearly communicated with me beforehand just how bad this was and how it shaped the core of the character. It was the main goal for Fighter to overcome his past and to heal from this. So me, a sensible person, read this as, this leader is evil and a creep. Got it. And you'll probably see where this is going. I had assumed Warlock understood what she had written and placed these two antagonists in the same evil organization. I didn't tell the players, of course. This was all late game stuff and will be important later. Warlock also explicitly wished for a romance between her character and an NPC. I told her I would come up with something, or rather someone, and we'd see how it would play out. You might remember her thirst for romance fantasy wish fulfillment from my first post. I had severely underestimated it still. But with all that, the campaign was ready to go. It actually went really well for the first few sessions. The group had a good dynamic and the RP was fun. Warlock's biggest and only character flaw was that her Firbolg desperately wanted to be taken seriously and not treated as a child, which checks out, I guess. But still, the game was fun, up until about 5 sessions in. Warlock started to ask more frequently when her love interest would show up, by which I mean she guilt-tripped me to introduce him earlier, as she wasn't having fun with the game. Since I was a first-time DM, that comment devastated me, and I obliged. We played weekend sessions back then, and after introducing the love interest, which I was actually really proud of, Warlock proceeded to sulk in a corner for the entire 2 days. I approached her eventually, and she broke into tears how she didn't feel a spark, and wasn't sure if the two characters were a good fit. I listened to her and asked what she wanted to do now. She proposed designing a love interest herself, as she knows what her character needs. I agreed. A few days later, I was presented with a dwarf glassblower who was significantly older, openly flirty, and of course, very sexually interested in Warlock. There was already commissioned art. There was already commissioned NSFW art, with heavy BDSM kinks displayed. all before the two had even met in the story. I stopped being a sensible person then. I was starting to feel stressed out about every session as to not cause this player to cry again, and make the game fun for her. It was around this time that I learned Warlock had mental health issues, those being HSP. She was a highly sensitive person. I want to point out that I didn't claim that she has mental health issues, she herself did, or rather Fighter did and Warlock later confirmed, but HSP became her go-to argument from that moment on. And we all know it's very easy to accuse someone of being discriminatory and abusive when you call mental health issues whenever things don't go your way. So things start to take a dark turn here. It was explained to me that she didn't handle not knowing things, or dramatic dark things well. It gave her high stress and anxiety, and that she couldn't deal with negative emotions in general. So, in an effort to reduce the risk of those, she wanted to know all the story beats and plot twists for her character. She wanted to have special items, a higher level than the others, and constant solo RP scenes between Warlock and her love interest, all under the guise of needing these things in order not to trigger her. After every session, she had notes on how I had played the love interest, or what she wanted to have or do next time. And I obliged every single time. Because I had already been blindsided and manipulated into bending over backwards for her. I changed the entire story I had planned for her character and told her what would happen every step of the way, until the one thing I figured would be more fun to play out as a plot twist happened. Warlock was kidnapped. You might recall how that went. Warlock got up and locked herself in my bathroom for hours. She had a full-on crying fit and almost had vomited on the table. According to her. She insisted that she needed to go home, but she didn't actually leave though, and that her mental health was suffering immensely because of what I had just done. I was, quite frankly, shocked by the intensity of that reaction and ended up apologizing profusely, to the point where I was crying too. Somehow though, after this insufferable high-stress situation, we continued the game. This would be the last session we played live. The virus of unknown origins hit, so it was online play and chat only, or how I like to call it, crash and burn. It was a slow burn up until this point, but we sure did burn. Because after this disaster of a session, I approached Warlock to discuss how her HSP was affecting her, and how I didn't think she was fit to continue playing the game. I had already reduced every bit of drama I could think of, but there was a certain something that I couldn't just take out, as it was a huge story arc. The two antagonists and their evil organization. In the last attempt to cater to her needs, I finally revealed this story beat to her. To say she was shocked was an understatement. She went absolutely ballistic about how she thought we had an agreement to not have any drama in the story. How dare I make this character evil? And most importantly, why is he a PDF file? Huh? So it turns out I was missing a bit of background from before the campaign even started. Fighter and Warlock are friends, have been for a long time, and they talked about their characters beforehand. Apparently, Warlock had written the mentor as a love interest. She had wanted them to reunite and become a couple later on, since her character was totally crushing on the mentor. It's totally love, and so tragic that they had to say goodbye. Huh? Fighter, sensibly, especially considering their own backstory, talked her out of this idea. However, Warlock carried the resentment of not playing out her dream couple throughout the entirety of the campaign, without me knowing. So now, the sheer possibility of the character she had written as evil and being attracted to an underage character being presented as such drove her to go nuclear. She accused me of mistreating her on purpose because I was apparently still bitter about character creation. And despite me giving her literally every single thing she demanded throughout the campaign, this was me being an abusive and toxic DM who maliciously put this twist in last minute just to fuck with her. In hindsight, it's actually appalling how it took her refusing to accept that a relationship between a 28-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy is in fact not okay to finally open my eyes. I made it clear at this point that this simply was not the campaign for her, and that it would probably be better for her to leave the game. There were, despite all of that, still plans made in case she wanted to sincerely come back and play again, but it never got to that. This fight bled into a lot of other games that we happened to play together, since it shaped my perception of her a lot, and eventually led to a falling out of the entire group. Needless to say, there was never another session for them. I even gave up on DMing, but slowly over time I remembered how much I loved world building and storytelling, and after a lot of thought I went through my old notes again. And here we are, present day, with a date for the next session right around the corner and a group full of lovely people who communicate well and trust me and each other. So why did I write this down? Maybe my story helps someone else finally open their eyes to toxic players at their table. I know we talk about no D&D is better than bad D&D, but it's such a simple truth. Don't let yourself become the person I was back then. Please trust your gut when you feel like someone is taking advantage of you or manipulating you. That is not how this whole thing is supposed to work. TLDR, highly manipulative player gets what she wants by using her mental health as a weapon and a shield, until an underage love interest suddenly is not on the table. End of story. Absolutely disgusting! Bruh, I don't even know where to begin other than asking for a hug in a shower, and I don't even know if I want the hug right now. Just saying, if this were my table, I would have absolutely ejected her the second I even caught a whiff of this kind of thing sneaking into my game. It's always these kinds of people who throw up the my poor mental health excuse when they have to face the fact that they're disgusting creeps who have no place in polite society. Seeing people like this throw up the mental health shield the second that there might be consequences for their actions only serves to advocate for the return of the lobotomy. My God, you guys, I am so sorry for the extra dark story today, but it's important that we do acknowledge that people like this exist. Parasites who only think about themselves and their own hedonism, with zero respect to how their actions and words could possibly affect the people surrounding them. Did she care that her first character was an insufferable stereotype that made her friend uncomfortable? No. Did she care that subjects like what she was trying to force into the game would be potentially traumatizing and or disgusting to other players? No. Should we give even a fraction of a rat's ass that her mental health could be negatively affected by her being kicked from the game? No. Mental health is incredibly important and is a subject that is particularly close to me. So that's why it absolutely rubs me the wrong way when genuine parasites like this are able to justify their reprehensible actions behind the veil of mental health. Your bad mental health is not someone else's bad day, week, or year. You may have got dealt a bad hand, but it's your hand. And just like in poker, you don't get to just walk around the table and start f***ing with other people's cards without getting ejected from the casino. I just want to say I appreciate OP taking the time to write this story to make sure other people don't make the same mistakes they did. I'm really sorry you had to deal with this, OP, but I'm also supremely glad to see that you've grown from all this. But you know what else I'm supremely glad for? Fan art! That's right, how about we take a look at this week's Gallery of the Drake. This week's fan art comes from viewer The Random Sith, who depicts an intrepid adventurer uncovering a hoard guarded by a being so evil that even the darkness cowers in his presence.
Your journey is at its end. I have foreseen your arrival. Only the strongest of your kind are allowed to serve and worship my divine being. Now for your first trial.
Oh yeah, hello? I'm here with DoorDash. Did you order the spicy chicken deluxe?
Yes I did. I devour only the spiciest of bird, for only a child of fire such as I could withstand the heat.
Yeah, sure, pal. I'll leave it here next to this pile of burnt corpses. Next time, leave a tip and maybe you'll get some customer service. Dick.
Fool, you have forgotten the soft drink that came with my meal. Now you shall.
And he's gone. Being a dragon in 2024 is just no f***ing fun anymore. Thank you again, The Random Sith, for submitting your art. Be sure to check out their Ko-Fi page, linked in the description. If you'd like to see your art featured in Gallery of the Drake, be sure to upload it to the official Den of the Drake subreddit, also linked in the description. Fan art is my favorite part of doing YouTube, and it means the world to me that I can inspire artists like you to create artwork like this. With the story over and artwork displayed, we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and send in your fan art. And if you feel like supporting the channel further, my Patreon and merchandise links are in the description. I would like to thank you all for listening, and I hope to see you next time in the Den of the Drake.